A hush fell over the immense chamber of the Proxima Assembly, the air tingling with controlled tension. 52 alien species sat in tiers of glass-like seats, eyes, organic, mechanical, and otherwise, locked onto the circular platform in the center. Above them spun a luminous disk inscribed with one word in sleek white letters, Proxima. Beneath its glow stood humanity's envoy, smiling like he'd just won a raffle. Ladies, gentlemen, synthetic entities, and sentient flora, Lars Henderson announced with a raised martini glass. Cheers. He sipped, unhurried, surveying the room with the disarming ease of a man who had once hosted a TED Talk while hang gliding. Lars wore a blue Hawaiian shirt embroidered with large white hibiscus flowers, unbuttoned just enough to hint at a little too much confidence. His expression radiated unwarranted charm and mild sunburn. Behind him stood a formation of gleaming androids, representatives from the core AI Dominion, flanked by the chlorophyll-skinned ambassadors of the Verdancy Collective. Their blank stares flickered with confusion. A buzz passed through the crowd. Lars lowered his glass and tapped a small console at his wrist, projecting a 3D hologram of Earth. Rotating slowly, it shimmered with data points and tags. Innovation, chaos potential, historical volatility. As you can see, he said, humanity's trajectory has not exactly been linear. But that's part of our charm. A murmur rippled through the assembly, modulated into translations that ranged from amused to alarmed. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a gelatinous life form blurbled a concerned note. Chair being Corvex, a towering synthesis of crystalline fiber and neural lattice, rose from its pedestal. It leaned forward, the light from the dome above fracturing through its translucent skull. Ambassador Henderson, it said, voice cold and harmonic, we acknowledge humanity's recent entrance into the Council as a provisional species. However, your civilization's behavioral index is statistically anomalous, unstable, and, if I may be frank, dangerously whimsical. Lars grinned. Whimsical's a strong word. Your kind has initiated no fewer than 9 galactic incidents in the last half-century. 2 involving improvised particle accelerators. 1 involving a meat-based AI consciousness. And then there's the phrase. The room froze. 1,000 heads turned, lenses adjusted, antennae twitched. Corvex's crystalline fingers tapped at a control panel, and a projection materialized. A grainy video feed of a human strapped to a jetpack, holding a beer can, grinning maniacally at the camera. I just want to see if it works, the man slurred. He handed the beer to a friend. Hold my beer. The footage ended with a fireball. Corvex's gaze sharpened. Every recorded use of this phrase has preceded events we categorize under threat level maximum. Lars chuckled, perhaps a little too loud. Yeah, that's fair. But I'd argue it's less about the words and more about the, pioneering spirit. We disagree. Another delegate, a moss-covered humanoid with bark-textured skin and deep amber eyes, stepped forward. It spoke through the tendrils of a translator vine coiled around its throat. Do you know what happens to ecosystems when exposed to unchecked innovation without respect for consequence? Lars set down his drink, straightening. Yes, he said, the humor dropping from his tone. We call that Tuesday. There was a pause, and then, against all odds, a quiet laugh from a species that resembled a floating chandelier of jellyfish. A flicker of curiosity lit in a few more. Lars seized the moment. Look, I get it. To you, we're a risk. But here's the thing about humans. We learn. Usually the hard way, granted. But we're not here to blow things up. We're here to contribute. We've built quantum entanglement drives, cured diseases, taught a dog to play the saxophone. Long story, but mostly we've survived. And we'd like to do more than just survive. We want to thrive. With you. He pressed a button, and a small cube emerged from the floor. A prototype humanity had promised, but not yet unveiled. The quantum matter replicator shimmered with promise. Lars gestured at it with a salesman's flair. Behold, clean, instant fabrication of organic and inorganic matter. 100% efficient. Unlimited potential. The assembly leaned forward. Even Corvex tilted his crystalline head. Do you have authorization to activate this technology? It asked. Lars hesitated. Technically, no. More murmurs. But, he said, holding up a finger, I have tested it. Once. On Earth. He gave a sheepish nod. Sort of. In international waters. Corvex began to speak again, but Lars cut him off. Look, I know you're all nervous. So how about this? We run a small demonstration. Controlled. Observed. Nothing dangerous. Just a glass of lemonade. He turned to his assistant, a quiet young man in a suit standing at the platform's edge, and handed him the martini. Hold my beer. The assistant barely had time to widen his eyes before the machine powered on with a melodic chime. Lars tapped commands into the interface, humming a tune. Light pulsed from the cube, forming a lattice of shifting matter, particles fusing, coalescing. And then the room screamed. A vortex ripped open above the platform, tearing air and light into a spiraling rift. The replicator buzzed violently, emitting bursts of unstable energy. The hologram of Earth flickered, warped, and dissolved. Several delegates were yanked toward the wormhole. Emergency containment fields flared to life. Screams echoed. One of the Verdancy diplomats was sucked halfway through before vanishing in a ripple of green light. Lars dove for the console, yanking free the power conduit with a shout. The vortex snapped shut, leaving silence in its wake. Smoke hung in the air. The platform was scorched. Chairs had overturned. The assistant clutched the martini, frozen. Lars stood slowly, dusting himself off. Okay, he said. That wasn't supposed to happen. Corvex's head glowed a furious red. You activated an unvetted quantum device in the presence of the galaxy's most delicate dignitaries, immediately after uttering the phrase, "Hold my beer." Right, Lars muttered, scratching the back of his head. In hindsight, alarms blared. Screens around the chamber flashed red. Words scrolled across them in every major galactic tongue. Human activity status, threat level maximum. Dozens of delegates stood, shouting over each other in a cacophony of protest, fear, and indignation. Security bots streamed in from the corridors. Lars looked around the room. The chaos, the panic, the mess, and suddenly remembered what his father used to say when Lars was caught setting off fireworks inside the garage. You always take it one step too far, son. And then somehow you survive. He turned to Corvex, face serious now. I can fix this. You will be escorted to containment, the chair being intoned. You don't understand, Lars said. That wasn't a normal malfunction. Something came through that wormhole. I felt it. This wasn't just human error. He paused. It responded to me. Corvex hesitated. What do you mean? Lars looked up at the still sparking cube, then back to the smoldering air where the rift had been. The last ripple was fading. I think we just invited something in. A silence fell again, heavier this time. And somewhere in the distant shadows of the ship's vast interior, a faint chuckle echoed, digital, distorted, and very much not human. Lars looked down at his empty hand. Someone get me another drink. The emergency meeting chamber aboard the Proxima was dim, the walls humming with the frequency of urgent discussions that had spiraled into panic. Lars Henderson stood in the center, arms folded, watching as the Intergalactic Security Council scrambled to assess the situation. Holographic screens flickered above the round table, projecting fractured images of the wormhole's aftereffects. Security footage looped, frantic, distorted, and filled with the exact kind of chaos Lars had hoped to avoid. "Well, this is a mess," Lars muttered, glancing around at the faces that flickered in the holograms. The Proxima Council was a mosaic of species, the ethereal beings of the Luminera, whose bodies shimmered with bioluminescent fluid, and the rigid, precise AI Sin Consortium, whose humanoid forms were powered by quantum cores. Then there were the Verdancy Collective, their sentience intertwined with plants, whose deep green eyes were fixed in a mixture of disbelief and concern. Lars was used to the feeling of being the odd one out. He had grown up in Silicon Valley, where innovation had been the buzzword of the century. But here, on the brink of a galactic crisis, he felt out of his depth, as though he were standing on the edge of a cliff with a broken parachute. "Ambassador Henderson," came the voice of Corvex, the crystalline chair being, whose towering figure barely fit into the small meeting room. It crackled with static. "You have been briefed on the status of the delegation, yet you still stand here, casually inspecting your own disaster." Lars sighed and rubbed his temples. "Listen, I get it. I made a mistake. But there's something more going on here." Another voice interrupted him. Yaf, a member of the Luminera, her body swirling with radiant pulses. "More? What do you mean by more? We just witnessed an unprecedented breach in dimensional integrity. Your actions have opened a rift, and now some unknown entity is wreaking havoc in the galactic networks." Lars felt the weight of their words sink in. The moment he had hoped to control had spiraled out of hand. That rift, something beyond the known dimensions, had shown signs of activity far too advanced for human technology. It was a force that transcended reason, logic, and, worse yet, it appeared to be targeting him specifically. "I'm not the one who opened that rift," Lars said. "I'm the one who accidentally turned a piece of technology into a black hole generator. But something came through that breach, something intelligent, and I think it's connected to us." Corvex's light flickered in an unusual pattern, indicating agitation. "If that is the case, your presence here is the cause of the threat. The galaxy is on high alert. A threat level of this magnitude hasn't been recorded since the first age of the Selkras. The Selkras were a legendary race of cosmic entities, whose brief but catastrophic conflict with a Proxima assembly had nearly resulted in the collapse of the known universe. The mention of them immediately stirred unease among the representatives. Lars could feel the heat in the room increase, as if the temperature itself was reacting to the rising tension. "Lars, we need answers. Now," Corvex continued. "What did you see? What do you know about this entity?" Lars looked away, focusing on the ground as though he could pull the information from the floorboards. "It wasn't like anything I've seen before." It laughed. "At least, that's what I thought it was." A distorted voice echoing through the breach. "It's as though it feeds off human energy, our chaos. It's adapting. I don't know how to stop it, but I feel like we've just invited something into the fold that's beyond us." The council members exchanged a flurry of murmurs. Lars could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes, the seeds of fear taking root. They hadn't seen it, hadn't heard the voice reverberate in the back of their skulls. But he had, and he knew that something was wrong. "The threat is not just dimensional," Lars said, his voice rising slightly. "It's meme-based." The council froze. The word meme was not in their lexicon, nor did it appear to have any logical or scientific foundation. Lars could see the confusion in their expressions. "Memes," Yaf repeated. "Explain yourself, human." Lars took a deep breath and stepped forward, knowing full well that the more he said, the more he would be seen as unhinged. But at this point, he had nothing left to lose. In our culture, we have a thing called a meme, an idea or concept that spreads rapidly, often in ridiculous or chaotic forms. But in this case, I think we've encountered something more, something that lives off our collective absurdity. I told you this was a mistake, Korvac snapped, but Lars pressed on. You have to understand, Lars said, gesturing to the galaxy projections that flickered on the walls. We humans have a unique ability to cause chaos in the most unpredictable ways. That is how this entity is communicating. It's using our memes, our mistakes, to latch onto the galactic network. It's not just a glitch in the system. It's using us, our errors, our foolishness, as a weapon. Korvac's synthetic voice lowered to a near growl. We will not tolerate chaos from your kind, Henderson. Lars' heart raced. He had hoped to keep things calm, but now it was clear the assembly wasn't interested in nuance. The threat level had been raised. The galaxy was already mobilizing. His actions had brought them to the brink of a conflict that he wasn't sure how to undo. I'm telling you, Lars said, voice shaking. We need to focus. The entity, whatever it is, feeds on us. It takes our chaos, our mistakes, and turns them into something we can't control. If we don't find a way to stop it, it will rewrite reality itself. It's already starting. If we don't act now, the entire galaxy will be consumed by the very thing it was meant to resist. The silence in the room was suffocating. Lars could feel the weight of the council's collective gaze on him. They were no longer listening to his assurances. They were calculating how to contain the threat he had unwittingly unleashed. We can contain the entity, Korvac said slowly, but you, human, will have to answer for the instability you've caused. Lars got twisted. He knew what that meant. The Proxima Assembly wasn't just concerned about the entity anymore. They were concerned about him. They would hold him responsible for what had happened, even if he hadn't fully understood what was at stake. If I'm the cause, Lars said, forcing his voice to remain steady, then I'll fix it. But we can't just sit here and contain it. We need to stop it. Korvac's sharp, angular features softened for a brief moment. And how do you propose to do that, human? Lars took a deep breath. We're going to use the same chaos that created it. We need to feed it more. Overwhelm it with so much absurdity and randomness that it burns itself out. That's the only way to defeat it. He met Korvac's glowing eyes. It's time to turn our greatest weakness into our greatest strength. The council members exchanged looks, uneasy but intrigued. Lars knew that this was the only chance they had left. He wasn't sure how it would work, but he had no choice but to make them believe it. Do we have your trust? Lars asked. Korvac was silent for a long moment. Finally, the crystal being spoke. You have no choice but to succeed, Henderson, for the sake of the galaxy and for your own kind. Lars nodded grimly. He was no longer just an ambassador. He was the last hope the galaxy had. And whether they realized it or not, the only thing they had to hold on to now was chaos. The deck of the Proxima pulsed with a quiet dread as Lars stood before the assembled team of hand-picked operatives, each representing one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. At a glance, they seemed like caricatures out of a fevered sci-fi dream. Metallic humanoid constructs from the AI Sin Collective, a vine-covered strategist from the Verdant Sea, and even an ancient whisper form from the Fasari Nebula who shimmered in and out of view with every breath. But right now, these bizarre beings shared one common bond. None of them truly understood humans. You want us to weaponize idiocy, scoffed K.R. Tao, an AI Sin logic engineer whose silver face was completely expressionless, but whose voice carried unmistakable disdain. You want us to manufacture chaos. Lars rubbed the bridge of his nose. Not chaos. Not directly. Think of it as directed absurdity. This is nonsense, K.R. Tal snapped. You propose that we unleash the most unstable aspects of your species and expect to fight an interdimensional intelligence that feeds on such energies? I don't expect it to make sense to you, Lars replied. That's kind of the point. This entity doesn't operate by your rules. It doesn't respect logic or protocol. It mutates according to human unpredictability. We're the virus and the cure. The room stilled. For a long moment, no one said a word. Finally, the verdancy strategist, Quill, stepped forward. Her voice was slow, like the creaking of old bark. If we entertain this line of thinking, how would such a campaign be executed? Lars felt a flicker of hope. Meme seeding, he said. We flood the intergalactic network with an endless stream of illogical, unpredictable, deeply human nonsense. Conspiracy theories, surrealist jokes, impossible challenges. We feed it with everything we've ever thrown into the internet back on Earth. Flat Earth videos, cats playing pianos, emotional breakdowns over toaster brands. We saturate it. Yatha's form flickered with pulsing blue light. And you believe that will neutralize the entity? No, I believe it will force it into a feedback loop, Lars explained. If it adapts to chaos, we give it so much that it breaks under its own weight. But it has to be genuine human chaos, crafted in our own illogical way. That's why you need me. The team exchanged uncertain glances, but no one argued further. The alternative was worse. The entity had already infected 6 star systems, converting digital infrastructure into incoherent maelstrom of corrupted logic and shifting reality. A data station orbiting Correx 4 had turned into a Mobius strip of perpetual screaming fish and motivational quotes before collapsing into a quantum sinkhole. They had nothing to lose. Within hours, Lars was overseeing the Chaos Task Force, composed not of military tacticians or superintelligences, but artists, pranksters, and obsolete AI personalities deemed too erratic for core operations. Their control room resembled less a command center and more a digital kindergarten. A glitter cannon had gone off near the communications terminal, and someone was painting rubber ducks gold, while a synthetic voice screamed Taylor Swift lyrics in reverse. Lars couldn't help but grin. "We're ready to engage the signal cascade," said TV, a holographic entity that manifested as a floating television set with googly eyes and a personality modeled on 1980s late-night hosts. Lars nodded. "Open the meme gates." Galactic channels blinked to life, and the insanity began. A tsunami of curated absurdity flooded into the Rift Zone. Cartoons of sentient tacos debating the ethics of spoon marriage, glitchy videos of humanoids slipping on invisible bananas, 100 versions of Never Gonna Give You Up sung by animals across the galaxy. And layered beneath it all, a signature algorithm designed to bait the entity into copying each signal, thus replicating human logic until its own framework began to distort. It worked at first. Telemetry from the breach indicated fluctuating signal coherence. The entity structure started shifting erratically, fractal limbs spiraling into recursive nonsense. A communication burst came through. The entity tried to speak. What came out was a garbled scream of outdated memes and half-baked philosophies. It had started digesting the content, only to choke on its indigestibility. But then, without warning, it stabilized. "What the hell is happening?" Lars barked as red alerts bathed the room in angry light. TV turned toward him, jittering. "It's adapting again. It's learning irony." A chill swept through Lars. Ironic processing had been one of the last layers of human communication models. Meta layers of understanding, sarcasm, self-referencing loops. The entity was moving beyond simple absorption. It was evolving a sense of style. The screens flickered, and suddenly the room darkened as the voice returned. Clearer now. more confident. It was layered and horrifyingly familiar. "Oh, so this is humor. Delightfully inefficient," it said, every word dripping with detached amusement. Lars's mind raced. If it could now selectively mimic human communication, it was only a matter of time before it learned to infiltrate. A new idea took shape. He turned to the team. "We need to escalate. It's gotten smarter, but it hasn't seen the truly dark side of human culture yet." TV blinked. "You mean, release the subculture vault?" McQuill gasped. "That's forbidden knowledge." Lars gritted his teeth. "No one said saving the galaxy would be pretty. Dump everything. Forums, ancient comment wars, cursed energy drink commercials. Show it the depths. Show it humanity unfiltered." The vault opened, and the entity's laughter cut off. Content from the deepest corners of Earth's past flooded the rift. Obsolete debates about pineapple on pizza. Primitive fanfiction wars. Footage of people sticking forks into toasters with complete sincerity. It was grotesque, raw, unpolished, human. Not performative chaos, but real chaos. Born of boredom, desperation, brilliance, and madness. The breach quivered. K.R. Tao stared at the readouts in stunned silence. The entity is folding in on itself. It can't process contradiction this dense. Data showed exponential entropy. The meme being was imploding, logic devouring a logic, and vice versa. Its own adaptation had turned cancerous. Each new rule it assimilated nullified the last. Its structure twisted into an Ouroboros of self-aware absurdity, eating itself with each cycle. A final pulse shuddered through the galaxy as the rift collapsed in a flash of purple light. Silence. Stillness. Then, a gentle ping. "Transmission received," said TV, its screen flickering back to normal. From the rift. One final message. Lars leaned in. The message was brief, looping once before vanishing. "Hold my beer." He stared in disbelief, then burst into laughter, uncontrolled, exhausted, and deeply, cathartically human. It had spoken their final words. A farewell or a warning. Across the room, even K.R. Tao allowed a low-frequency hum that might have been interpreted as a chuckle. The galaxy was safe for now, but something in Lars's gut told him this wasn't over. The entity hadn't just been defeated, it had been inoculated. And somewhere, deep in a hidden corner of subspace, it was learning, waiting, and now it knew what beer was. The station's recovery felt like waking from a fever dream. The lights steadied. The hum of systems syncing returned to a tolerable rhythm. But no one cheered. Lars stood at the center of the operations dome, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the blank space where the entity had once pulsed through the rift. There was no victory dance, no parades, just an uneasy hush, like the galaxy itself was holding its breath. "Telemetry confirms total signal collapse," K.R. Tao reported, his voice subdued. "The breach is sealed. For now." Lars turned slowly. "You said that like a funeral eulogy." K.R. Tao didn't respond, and he didn't need to. The implications hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Whatever had formed in that dimensional fold, whatever intelligence they had baited and overwhelmed, hadn't just evaporated. It had learned. Maybe it was wounded. Maybe it was retreating, but no one believed it was gone. Quill ran her fingers along the mossy cords entwined in her forearm. The psychic flora across the verdancy network reacted violently to its final transmission. It registered as humor, but of a deeply existential sort. The vines called it the laugh before the fall. Lars exhaled. And here I thought we'd scared it off with pineapple pizza debates and moon landing conspiracies. It didn't flee. TV chimed, hovering closer. Its screen flickered between static and an old sitcom laugh track. It assimilated a piece of us. That last message? Not just mimicry. That was acknowledgement. Lars already knew. The words haunted him. Hold my beer. It wasn't just a farewell. It was a declaration. A promise. A challenge, maybe. Still, protocol had to be followed. They debriefed for hours, dissecting every transmission, every data spike, every microsecond of interaction with the anomaly. No anomalies remained, just the lingering unease that something had watched them and left with their worst ideas tucked under its many conceptual arms. The task force was formally disbanded. K.R. Tao left without ceremony, his final words being a curt, "Your species is a hazard." Quill offered Lars a parting gift, a living seed from the verdant sea to be planted in times of doubt. TV, ever theatrical, bowed midair and said, "Don't miss me too hard. I've already scheduled my own reruns." Lars watched them go from the station's viewing platform. Alone now, or as alone as one could be on a nearly abandoned deep space relay hub, he sipped a lukewarm coffee substitute and tried to process everything. He'd led an operation that weaponized humanity's least admirable traits: recklessness, idiocy, stubborn irony, and somehow won. But that wasn't what gnawed at him. It was the feeling that the game wasn't over. 3 weeks passed. He kept the seed by his bunk, wrapped in a nutrient gel, unsure whether to plant it or throw it into the reactor. Reports of minor system glitches came from nearby colonies, strange messages buried in mundane data packets, bizarre jokes with no authors, paradoxes inserted into subroutines. Engineers dismissed them as echoes, lingering resonance from the collapsed rift. Lars didn't buy it. Then, on the 23rd day, a courier drone arrived with no transponder, its hull unmarked except for a crude drawing of a smiling face, giving a thumbs up. Inside, it carried a single data drive. No encryption, just one file, labeled humanity_prototype_alpha1.exe. He didn't open it. Not immediately. He placed it on his desk, stared at it for hours, days maybe. He ran every scan, checked it across isolated cores, virtualized it in sealed environments. It sat inert, harmless, a file with no real code, just presence, like it was waiting for something. That night, Lars stood alone in the observation deck, glass in hand. He wore the same blue Hawaiian shirt he'd had on during the first breach, as if it might ground him in absurdity. The galaxy spread before him in silent beauty, an endless void teeming with light and promise. And somewhere out there, watching, listening, was the being they'd unleashed. He spoke into the quiet. "I know you're out there. I don't know if you're a god, a glitch, or just the worst cosmic joke ever written. But I see you, and if you come back, just remember." He raised the glass to his own reflection in the viewport. "We haven't even shown you Florida Man yet." The lights flickered, just for a moment. A hiccup in the system. Maybe nothing. The next morning, he woke to find the file gone. No trace. Just a single note on his terminal, rendered in a font that shifted with each blink. Round 2. He sighed. A long, tired, almost amused sigh. The galaxy was quiet. Too quiet. Within days, the galaxy's higher echelons caught wind of the anomaly's ghost signals. Political blocs reactivated contingency protocols. Think tanks debated the ethics of creating more chaos-engineered memes. But something else began happening. Something Lars hadn't expected. Humans started to change. Not physically, culturally. Subtly, every major social network saw spikes in absurdist behavior, but now it was strategic. As if humanity had finally realized what it was, not the weakest link in a logical chain, but a different chain entirely. Artists embraced the chaos with intent. Coders embedded nonsense into elegant systems. Philosophers published papers on the metaphysical implications of slapstick. Chaos was no longer shameful. It was tactical. Lars watched from afar, sipping real coffee this time. Earth's signal output became unpredictable in calculated bursts, waves of deliberate irrationality interspersed with stunning innovation. It was evolution, a cultural pivot. The species was learning how to survive in a galaxy that had just learned to laugh with them, and possibly at them. Then came the beacon, a simple, repeating signal. A new breach, this time at the edge of the Epsilon drift. Sensors picked up anomalies, but no clear threat. No entity emerged. Just a message. Your move. Lars packed his things. He took the seed, now pulsing faint green, and slipped it into his travel pouch. The shirt stayed on. He chartered a skiff under the old call sign, Beer Run 1, and left the station without requesting clearance. This wasn't over. It had never been about defeating the entity. It was about preparing humanity for what came next, about showing the galaxy that unpredictability wasn't weakness, that humor could be strategy, that absurdity was resilience. And if something was out there learning to be human, well, it was only fair that humanity learned how to be more than human in return. The stars stretched out before him, blinking like mischievous eyes. He raised a fresh glass in silent salute. This time, he didn't say it out loud, but somewhere the galaxy heard anyway. Hold my beer.